It was a Tuesday night. Unremarkable. No protests. No parades. Just a quiet summer hum rolling through the south side of Chicago like it always did. Low, steady, alive. Zion Matthews was walking home. Backpack slung loose over one shoulder. AirPods in. A folder in his hand marked, Ward Initiative, Summer Capstone Project? He'd just finished a planning session for the Youth Civics Fair. He'd stayed after to lock up the basement himself. Esther trusted him with the keys. That alone made his chest swell a little. In these streets, trust weighed more than currency. He turned the corner onto 75th and Aberdeen. The block was dim. A street lamp flickered overhead like it couldn't decide if the night deserved light. Then, red and blue. At first, Zion thought the cruiser would roll past. It usually did. He was used to cops. You learned young in Chicago. Make no sudden moves, keep your hands visible, and never, ever get clever. But this one stopped. Window rolled down. A voice called out. Yo, you got ID on you. Zion pulled one AirPod out. Sir. I said, ID. Step over here. He hesitated. Did I do something? Two officers stepped out of the car. One tall, pale, shaved head. The other younger, silent, eyes darting. The older one chuckled. Just a routine check. You fit the description. Zion blinked. Of what? No answer. He raised his hands. Slowly. I'm just heading home from my program. I'm part of the Ward Initiative. The taller cop stiffened. The other looked confused. Oh, great. The first one muttered. Another future politician. They approached. Too close. One reached for his backpack. Zion stepped back instinctively. And that's when it happened. A shove. Hard. Sudden. Zion hit the pavement. Backpack skidded. Folder popped open. Papers fluttered across the sidewalk. Essays about justice, student voter guides, a map of polling stations. The cop laughed. Where's the weapon, genius? You write people to death. Zion couldn't breathe, not from pain, but from shock. He tried to speak, but a knee pressed into his back before he could. Stop resisting, the voice said. 3 minutes later, they let him go. No citation. No explanation. Just a shrug and... Wrong guy. And then they were gone, leaving Zion on the concrete, with a torn folder, a bruised cheek, and a name burning in his throat. Esther. He didn't cry. Not until he got home. Not until his mother saw his scraped chin and trembling hands. And even then, he only said 6 words. They didn't even see me. The next day, Esther Ward opened her door to find a woman on her porch. Young, sharp, tired, eyes puffy, voice controlled, like someone holding back a flood with a whisper. Ms. Ward, my name is Layla Matthews. My son is Zion. Esther didn't need the rest. She stepped aside and opened the door wider. Come in, she said softly. Tell me what they did. Inside, Layla unfolded the story. Word by word. Quiet at first. Then louder. Esther listened. She always listened. And when Layla finished, voice cracking on the final sentence. He was just trying to get home. He was just walking. Esther sat still for a long moment. Then she stood, walked to her cabinet, pulled out the box. Marcus's box. Where she kept the last letter, the folded flag, the list of names she had once buried in silence. She opened it, removed the folded paper inside, unfolded it carefully, and handed it to Layla. It read, in Marcus's handwriting. Protect the ones who still believe. And if they fall, make sure they rise louder. Esther looked at Layla, and then at Zion's torn folder on the table. They thought they stopped the boy, she said. But what they really did was wake up something they can't put back to sleep. The precinct was quiet, not silent. Phones rang, printers spat out citations, and someone in the back cursed over paperwork. But there was a strange edge to the air, a tension that hadn't been there the night before. Officer Rick Halverston didn't notice at first. He'd just finished his overnight patrol and was sipping burnt coffee from a styrofoam cup, half reading through shift notes. Still smirking about the punk, he and Bennett had let off with a warning on 75th. Smart mouth. Some youth program. Probably funded by the city to make politicians feel better. He hadn't even cuffed the kid. Didn't need to. Letting him scramble for his papers, tossing his stuff in the street, that was enough to send a message. We see you. You're not invisible. But you're not safe either. He didn't remember the kid's name. Barely registered the face. Just another stop. Another story that would disappear in the morning fog. Until Officer Bennett walked in, white as a sheet, phone still in hand. Hey, he said. You remember that kid last night? Halverston scoffed. What? The little politician. You know what he said before we let him go? What? He said, I'm part of the Ward Initiative. Halverston frowned. So? Bennett swallowed. Ward. As in Marcus Ward. The name landed like a bullet. They both went quiet. Because even the most callous cops in Chicago knew that name. Marcus Ward. The soldier. The hero. The firewalker. The son of Esther Ward, the woman who single-handedly flipped the system without raising her voice. The one whose folded flag had silenced entire precincts. And now they had stopped someone tied to her? Halverston's smirk vanished. Wait, you think he was related? No, Bennett said, scrolling through his phone. Worse. He's in her program. One of her kids. And then the headline hit. Ward Initiative student claims police harassment. Esther Ward confirms involvement. Published by the Southside Sentinel, a small community-run paper with an outsized voice. It didn't take long to spread. By noon, the headline had been retweeted by 5 city aldermen, 3 former students of the program, and a U.S. congresswoman. Underneath the article, a photo of Zion's bruised cheek, taken by his mother that morning. His torn folders spread across a kitchen table. The caption, they didn't arrest him, but they tried to erase him. Back at the 13th precinct, Lieutenant Davis stormed out of his office. He was holding a printout of the article in one hand and a body cam check log in the other. Tell me you turned your damn camera on. Bennett stayed quiet. Tell me, Davis barked, that you at least logged the stop. Halverston opened his mouth, but the look in Davis's eyes shut him down before the lie could form. Jesus Christ, Davis muttered. Do you know who you touched last night? We didn't touch him, Al. You touched her. In a corner of the station, one of the rookies whispered to another. It's like watching someone slap Rosa Parks and then check the internet. Across town, in the conference room of the Ward Initiative headquarters, Zion sat quietly beside Esther. He hadn't spoken much. Still processing. Still unsure how his name ended up in headlines before he had even given it shape. Esther handed him tea. Her hands were slow. Steady. You're not in trouble, she said gently. You're in history. Zion looked up. I didn't want this. She nodded. Neither did I. Neither did Marcus. But history doesn't ask for volunteers. It picks who's ready. He stared at the bruises on his hands, then at the mural of Marcus on the far wall. I didn't do anything brave, Zion whispered. You stood still, she said. That's where it always starts. Outside, the media had begun to gather. A press van. A few folding chairs. One podium. Esther didn't call them. She never had to. Because her silence was a signal now. And every time she chose to speak, the world paused to hear what broke it. But this time, she didn't step forward. She let Zion speak first. And when he did, his voice was small, but clear. My name is Zion Matthews. I am 19 years old. I'm part of the Ward Initiative. I didn't steal anything. I didn't fight anyone. I didn't raise my voice. I was just walking home, and they still made me feel like a threat. He looked down for a beat, then up. But I know who I am now, and I know who has my back, and I'm not afraid to walk anymore. Esther stepped beside him, placed her hand on his shoulder. Didn't speak, just stood. In that image, a young black man standing beside an older black woman in black made the city freeze. Because for the second time in 2 years, someone said the name Ward out loud during a traffic stop. And the officers who heard it laughed. They weren't laughing anymore. The doorbell rang just before sunrise. Esther Ward was already awake. She always was. She had just finished lighting the morning candle beneath Marcus's photo. The house was still, no reporters, no calls, no notifications. Only the soft smell of black tea steeping and the creak of a house that had learned to breathe in silence. When the bell rang again, it wasn't frantic. It was soft. Steady. Like someone who knew she would answer. She opened the door without asking who it was. Because Esther Ward never opened doors with fear. A man stood on the porch. Black. Mid-40s. Clean-shaven. Dressed not in a suit, but in something sharper. Navy blue slacks, a pressed gray shirt, and eyes that had clearly seen too much. He held a folded envelope in one hand and a look of hesitation in the other. Ms. Ward, he asked. She nodded once. I'm not press. I'm not police. Well, I used to be part of what we called the other side. Esther raised an eyebrow. You were CPD? He shook his head. Worse. I was intel. His name was Adrian Greaves, former analyst at a now-defunct Chicago Public Safety Task Force, one of the many quiet city-funded projects formed to observe and report but not intervene, in community programs labeled as radicalizing influences. He handed her the envelope. Inside were printed documents, memos, screenshots, a list. At the top, Youth to Monitor, Community-Based Activism Programs, Internal Eyes Only. Highlighted in yellow, Zion Matthews, Yolanda Reyes, Tyrell Hayes, deceased. Esther Ward. She read the names without emotion. But Adrian watched her hands. They didn't tremble. They just tightened, slightly, around the paper. "Why are you bringing this now?" she asked. Adrian exhaled. "Because I was part of the team who flagged Zion. I ran the analysis. Fed his name into the system after he gave that school board speech last year." "The speech about voter suppression?" He nodded. "We called it potential for influence. We didn't even have to prove anything. Just plant the seed." Esther didn't speak. Adrian looked away. "I quit 3 months ago. I couldn't sleep knowing I was tracking kids who were just trying to clean up their own streets." He looked back at her. But this last incident with Zion, it wasn't just coincidence. He was targeted. Not for what he did, for who he was becoming. Esther sat down on the porch bench, the envelope in her lap, sunlight climbing the horizon behind her. "I always knew this city was afraid of noise," she said softly. "But I didn't know it feared quiet leadership more." Adrian looked at her carefully. "You have every right to bury this city in lawsuits. But if I may, there's a smarter way." She raised an eyebrow. He continued, "You've already built the Ward Initiative. Let this file burn in daylight. Hold a forum. Not a protest. Not a rally. A deposition in public. Invite the city. Invite the youth. Invite everyone who's ever been told they're too loud or too angry or too much." He paused, and then let them speak. Esther leaned back. Her fingers gently ran over Marcus's dog tags around her neck. "You think they'll listen?" Adrian met her gaze. "They're already listening, Ms. Ward. You're the one who taught them how." By noon that day, Esther met with Zion and the core leadership of the 14th Step, the advanced group of Ward Initiative students trained in public policy and restorative justice. She didn't speak for long. She didn't need to. She simply handed the envelope to Zion. "It's your story now, and how you tell it will decide how many more names go on lists like these." Zion opened the envelope, read every line, then closed it. He looked up, jaw set. "Then we make them listen, and we bring receipts." The event was planned within days. "We're not the threat." A youth LED public hearing, hosted at Malcolm X College Auditorium, open to the public, open to the press, with a panel made entirely of teens and 20-somethings who had experienced profiling, harassment, surveillance, or had lost someone who had. Esther didn't take a seat on the panel. She sat in the front row, just like she had at Marcus's graduation, because this time, the children were leading. That evening, Zion opened the hearing with 5 words. "They said my name out loud." He held up the city memo with his name circled in red. And then, for the first time since the incident, he told the story from beginning to end. No rage, no dramatics, just clarity. And then he said, "I thought I was lucky I didn't get arrested. But now I know, I was just watched instead. And that's not freedom. That's just a different kind of prison." By the time the second speaker stepped up, Yolanda Reyes, a 22-year-old organizer from Little Village, the live stream had over 80,000 viewers. By the time the fourth speaker finished, it hit 250,000. And by the time the final speaker, Zion, closed the hearing with, "We are not what you're afraid of, but we're everything you should be listening to." The country was watching. Again. And outside the auditorium, tucked beneath a small bouquet of sunflowers left at the door, someone had written on a note card, "This is what happens when you say the wrong name to the right generation." The official word from the 13th precinct came 3 days after the public hearing. There is no existing body cam footage of the alleged stop involving Mr. Zion Matthews on the date in question. No incident report was filed. No record of interaction exists in the system. Short, polished, almost bored in tone, like they were swatting at an inconvenience, not addressing a crisis. Esther read the statement once, then twice. She handed it to Zion without saying a word. He scanned the lines, then looked up. "They're acting like it didn't happen." Esther's voice was calm. That's always the first defense of the guilty. Denial. Disappearance. And when that doesn't work, discredit. But this time, the silence felt like a trap set too late. Because while the city claimed there was no evidence, someone else had started looking. Derek Kent. Yes, that Derek Kent. The former CPD officer who once stood in the rain and watched his partner nearly draw a gun on Esther Ward. He'd resigned, publicly repented, disappeared from headlines. But he hadn't stopped working. Now he ran a civilian-led research group tucked in the back of an old legal aid building, tracking patterns of abuse, use of force reports, and departmental cover-ups. When he saw Zion's name in the news, he reached for a file marked Precinct 13/Unfiled Stops, Pattern Watch, and found something. 2 entries, dated the night of Zion's stop. One cruiser logged in as active near 75th and Aberdeen. No stops recorded. No reports filed. And, critically, both officers had failed to upload bodycam data by end of shift. Kent stared at the screen. That wasn't a mistake. That was a deliberate omission. He picked up the phone and called a number saved under a name he hadn't spoken aloud in months. Esther Ward. She answered on the second ring. Her voice didn't carry surprise, only recognition. I thought you might call. Kent didn't waste time. I can't prove what happened yet, but I can prove what they tried to erase. Esther was quiet for a moment. Bring it. By nightfall, Kent was seated at Esther's dining table again. Same spot, same old teacup from that first conversation a year ago. Zion was there too, this time with his laptop open, fingers poised, eyes sharper than they'd ever been. Kent laid it out. The cruiser was out there. The cameras weren't uploaded. The report never got filed. That's not protocol violation. That's obstruction. Zion leaned in. Can we trace where they were? Like GPS or route data? Kent nodded slowly. Yes, if we get access to the CAD logs. Esther looked at both of them. Then get it. We've got enough firewood. Let's find the spark. But sparks need witnesses. And sometimes, the truth hides in broken things. Like a laundromat camera, obscured by lint and sun glare. Or a corner store security system with a glitchy timestamp. But if you line them up, frame by frame, time sync by time sync, you see Zion, walking, then standing still, then surrounded. The footage wasn't perfect. It didn't show the push. It didn't catch the moment of impact. But it proved presence. Zion was there, at the exact time, at the exact place. And now, so was the city's lie. By the end of the week, Zion's team compiled a full timeline dossier. GPS pings from the cruiser, street cam footage, officer login logs, a cell tower map showing Zion's phone unmoving for 4 full minutes at 75th and Aberdeen. For minutes. That's how long truth stood still. That's how long they thought no one was watching. The press was ready. But Esther stopped them. Don't leak it. Zion blinked. Why? Because this isn't a scandal. This is a test. Let's give them a chance to tell the truth. See what they do with mercy. Kent nodded, but he wasn't convinced. They buried evidence. They erased a kid. Esther sipped her tea. Exactly. And if they lie again, the city won't forgive them twice. She drafted a letter. Simple. Blunt. Delivered by hand to City Hall and CPD headquarters. You have 48 hours to release the internal cruiser logs and officer footage from July 12th. We have independent proof. We're giving you the opportunity to tell the truth on your own terms. After that, we'll let the people decide who owns the story. Esther Ward. 48 hours passed. The city stalled. The precinct issued no response. The mayor's office went silent. Until a leak appeared. From inside, a city staffer, anonymous, sent an encrypted message to Zion's public tip line. Attached, an internal email. Subject line. Delete pending July 12th footage. Flagged for suppression under threat mitigation protocol. Timestamp. 48 hours after the incident. Authored by a CPD media compliance officer. Signed with a name no one knew yet, but a department ID that led straight to the Deputy Director of Public Affairs. When Zion read the email, he said nothing. He just opened his laptop, hit upload, and wrote 3 words as the caption. Missing footage. Found truth. By midnight, the story had detonated. And for the first time, it wasn't just Esther they feared. It was the boy they tried to silence. And the digital generation who never lets the truth stay buried. The leak was everywhere. By dawn, Zion's upload had racked up over 2 million views across platforms. By noon, journalists were camped outside the 13th precinct. By sundown, it had reached Capitol Hill. This is not just about one stop, a congresswoman from Illinois said on national television. This is about the silent architecture of erasure, and the people brave enough to expose it. In neighborhoods across Chicago, you could feel something shift. It wasn't a riot. It wasn't a protest. It was a knowing, deep, collective, and electric. At barbershops in Bronzeville, fathers showed their sons Zion's video and said, "You see what receipts look like? That's how you walk with truth." At libraries, students passed around printouts of the internal CPD emails like they were sacred texts. At dinner tables, young people who never spoke about politics were quoting Esther Ward. And in the middle of it all, Zion walked to the corner store for milk like it was a battlefield. Not because he was scared, but because strangers kept stopping him. Old men clapping him on the back, mothers squeezing his shoulder, kids asking to take selfies with the boy who brought the truth back. Zion smiled, but it wasn't pride in his eyes. It was purpose. Heavy, earned, unflinching. At City Hall, the mayor was rattled. He'd gone radio silent for 36 hours, hiding behind press secretaries and ongoing investigations. But the leak forced his hand, and when he finally stepped up to the podium, suit too crisp, voice too measured, the people had already seen through the performance. "We are deeply concerned about the potential breakdown in CPD's internal protocols." He never said Zion's name. He never said Esther's. But his hands shook when a reporter asked, "Isn't this just like what happened to her? How many times does the city get to say we're investigating before we say we knew?" Back at the Ward Initiative office, the team was quiet. Not because they were unsure what to do, but because they'd been planning for this moment since the program began. Zion stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand. "We need to go national. Not with outrage. With structure. Every city has its own Ward story. Let's give them a template." Behind him, Yolanda Reyes nodded. She had just compiled a database of 83 youth-led programs across the country that had experienced similar incidents. And next to her, Derek Kent worked the phones, calling in every reform lawyer, civil liberties expert, and retired cop with a conscience. "If they won't investigate themselves, we'll do it for them." Esther watched from the side, not leading, not speaking, just listening, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes focused. And for a moment, she saw Marcus in all of them. In Zion's clarity, in Yolanda's fire, in Kent's burden. "These children," she whispered to herself, "are not echoes. They are the sound we were too afraid to make." 2 days later, the Ward Initiative launched a campaign called "Say It Before They Erase It." It was simple. A public archive where young people could submit videos of stops, harassment, silencing, threats, or just stories that never made it past their block. By the end of the first week, there were over 1,200 submissions. A trans student stopped for loitering while waiting for an Uber. A deaf boy handcuffed because he didn't respond fast enough. A girl dragged from a park bench for trespassing on public land she'd cleaned that morning. Zion watched every one. He cataloged them, mapped them, made their silence audible. And the city? The city started breaking. A whistleblower from inside CPD came forward, anonymously, through Kent's office. She confirmed the July 12th cover-up wasn't isolated. It was part of an internal culture, an unspoken code about which bodycam footage got lost and which kids were watched under unofficial suspicion lists. Her final message read, "I became a cop to protect people like Zion, but I was told to observe them instead. You don't need more apologies. You need exposure. Burn the whole playbook." Esther called a press conference. She hadn't spoken publicly since the mural unveiling. The cameras came faster than even she expected. She didn't read a statement. She just looked into the lens and said, "You erased his footage. You erased his report. And still, he showed up louder than you ever expected. So what does that say about you? And what does it say about him?" The city has a choice. Cover up the echoes, or listen to what they're telling you. That night, on the side of a train car, someone spray-painted a new slogan. They erased the footage, but not the witness, and not the ward. They came for the program, not the people. Because it's always easier to dismantle an institution than to admit it's doing the work the system never could. 2 weeks after Zion's timeline went viral, a proposal hit city council chambers. Motion to suspend funding to community-based civic organizations under review for potential extremist influence. They didn't mention the Ward Initiative by name, but everyone knew. It was a strike disguised as a policy, one written in the same sterile language as budget line items, but carrying the intent of a wrecking ball. On paper, it was about reassessment of fiscal efficiency. In whispers, it was about Esther and what she represented. One councilman, anonymous, but caught on a hot mic, said, "We can't have one grieving mother holding the city hostage." But it wasn't just one mother anymore. It was thousands of kids across Chicago, wearing shirts that read, "We are the 14th step." In the heart of the Ward Initiative building, tension simmered. Not panic, not fear, but strategy. Zion paced near the projector screen. Yolanda flipped through city statutes. Kent scrolled silently through the proposed motion, eyes narrowing. Esther sat at the edge of the room, her face unreadable. Zion broke the silence. "They're not afraid of our mistakes. They're afraid we haven't made any." Kent nodded. "This isn't just about punishing us. It's about making an example. Tell the next city, don't let a program like this grow." Yolanda tossed the motion packet on the table. "They think we're a threat. So let's act like one. Let's threaten them with competence." That week, the Ward Initiative released its annual report early. But this wasn't a bland PDF. It was a multimedia dossier, video testimonials, community metrics, program outcomes, and verified third-party audits. They sent it to every council member, every journalist, every school board chair, every pastor, and every family who had ever sent their child through the program. Then they held a press event, not at City Hall, but at the mural of Marcus Ward. Standing beneath his painted smile, Zion read the opening lines. "We didn't ask for money because we wanted power. We asked for it because this city never gave us peace. And now that we're building it for ourselves, you're trying to buy our silence back." He raised a file folder. "This is our ledger, our curriculum, our proof." He dropped it onto the podium. "Where's yours?" Across the city, the response exploded. Parents flooded council offices with calls. Alumni of the initiative wrote op-eds in every major paper. Faith leaders marched, not in protest, but in presentation, holding their own copies of the initiative report and quoting scripture. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. And still, Esther said nothing. Not publicly. Until the night of the council vote. She walked into City Hall alone. No entourage. No cameras. Just her. And the folder she never let out of her sight. Inside the chamber, the vote was about to begin. The mayor sat stiffly, trying not to make eye contact. Some of the council looked defiant. Others ashamed. A few scared. Esther didn't speak at the podium. She walked to the back. Sat quietly. And then, at the last moment, she stood. Councilwoman Harper, a longtime supporter of the initiative, noticed. She interrupted the session. "Madam Chair, with respect, I yield my time to Mrs. Ward." The room held its breath. Esther stepped forward. Her walk was slow, deliberate. She carried no notes. She didn't need any. "This city didn't give me a statue," she said. "It gave me a folded flag. And I accepted that. But what it also gave me was a duty. To every child whose voice was taught to whisper. You call this program dangerous. But let me tell you what danger looks like. It looks like a city that punishes the light, just because it exposes too much." She held up the folder. "Here's our audit. Our curriculum. Our outcomes. Now where's your audit of what happens in a patrol car at 2 a.m.? The room fell silent. "If you vote against this program, you're not cutting funding. You're cutting oxygen. And we'll remember that." She nodded once, then turned and walked out. The chamber erupted, not in applause. In reckoning. 3 council members flipped their vote. 2 abstained. The motion failed by a single ballot. That night, Esther returned home. Zion sat waiting on her porch. He didn't say anything. He just handed her a cup of tea. She sipped slowly, then spoke. "You fought with your words." Zion smiled. "I had a good teacher." In the morning, the mayor's office issued a statement. Short, measured, carefully worded, but one line stood out. "The Ward Initiative stands, and may it continue to raise the kind of citizens we should be." They tried to erase the program. They failed, because a city that forgets its sons will always be reminded by the mothers who refused to disappear. Derek Kent had no interest in going back. Not to the station, not to the badge, not even to the name he left behind when he resigned. But justice, like ghosts, never knocks. It just walks into the room and waits to be acknowledged. And on a cold Monday morning, it walked in holding a sealed envelope. The letter came from a whistleblower, an internal systems analyst at CPD who'd seen Kent's testimony last year and remembered something. There's a secondary list. Not just body cam suppression protocols. A watch list. Unofficial. Flagged names. Tagged as influence risk. She didn't sign her name. Just initials. LC. Inside the envelope was a flash drive. Encrypted. Buried under layers of anonymizing metadata. Kent decrypted it in 3 hours. When he opened the spreadsheet, his hands froze. There were 47 names. Teenagers, activists, artists, poets, youth organizers. All of them flagged with color-coded markers and vague justifications like observed at community gathering, attended protest, no arrest, linked to ward initiative, social media following, plus 5K, watch trending. And at the top of the list, in red, Zion Matthews. Next to it, affiliated, escalation unlikely, media exposure risk, high. But what chilled Kent wasn't Zion. It was the name 3 lines down. Layla Ward. Age 17. Status. Pending review. Relation. Niece of Esther Ward. Esther's niece. Marcus's cousin. Flagged. Watched. Monitored. Kent didn't hesitate. He printed 2 copies. One for the file. One for Esther. Then he called her. She met him in the back room of the legal aid building where he now worked. No reporters. No audience. When he placed the document on the table, she didn't touch it. She just looked at it, then said quietly. It was only a matter of time. Layla had joined the initiative 6 months earlier. Bright, focused, a little too headstrong for her age, but driven. She'd written a powerful op-ed for the Tribune's youth editorial section titled, What Happens to a City That Outlives Its Conscience? Apparently, someone at CPD had read it too. Esther finally picked up the paper, ran her fingers down the list. They're not profiling criminals, she said. They're profiling potentials. Kent nodded. This isn't just surveillance. It's strategy. If they can tag them early, they can shape them early. Control the narrative before it writes itself. Esther looked up. Then let's write faster. That night, she gathered Zion, Yolanda, and the 14th Step Council. The mood in the room was different now. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was clarity. Zion read the list out loud, one name at a time. When he finished, Yolanda said, We can't just be a program anymore. We have to be a firewall. They devised a plan. Contact every youth on the list quietly, securely. Offer resources, legal support, and digital literacy training. Create a public database, with consent, to make the targeting visible. And, most radically, hold a public town hall called. Flagged but not forgotten. But Esther had one condition. Layla doesn't go public. Zion blinked. Why not? Esther didn't flinch. Because she's still 17, and she deserves a childhood that doesn't require a podium. Zion nodded. But inside, something shifted. Because for the first time, Esther withheld the fight from someone she loved. And he understood why. But he also knew. Layla won't stay quiet forever, he told Kent afterward. Good, Kent replied. That's how revolutions begin. Days later, Kent got another anonymous tip. An officer, retired, bitter, too tired to lie anymore, left a voicemail on Kent's encrypted line. Check the Youth Engagement Tracker logs. They used it to justify grant money, but it became something else. We started flagging anyone who walked into the wrong building twice. Guess which building they meant? He was talking about the Ward Initiative HQ. Kent broke the encryption. Zion mapped the logs. And what they found was bigger than CPD. It was federal. Shared data. Shared watch lists. A quiet agreement between community stabilization programs and urban influence mapping tools. The same systems meant to track gang recruitment were being used to track kids who asked questions. Esther sat on her porch that night, the new folder in her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just whispered. They're afraid of what we already became, not what we're becoming. In her inbox were 2 messages. One from a New York Times journalist requesting an interview. One from Layla. The subject line. I know you're trying to protect me, but I need to speak. Esther didn't reply. Not yet. Because some echoes. Need time to find the space. They deserve. The folder didn't look like much. Just a slim manila envelope tucked in the corner of an old filing cabinet at the Office of Public Affairs, a place where paperwork usually went to die. But it was everything. Labeled in small, typed font. Community engagement, influence risk protocols, confidential internal use only. No signatures. No logos. Just coded headers, acronyms, and language that looked clean until you read it twice. Kent didn't find it. Elsie did. The same anonymous analyst who'd tipped him off about Zion. This time, she wasn't just leaking data. She was running. I copied this on my last day, she wrote in her message. I knew they'd delete it if they saw the news cycle turning. This is what you've been looking for. Inside the folder were 18 pages of directives outlining how city agencies, in partnership with law enforcement and risk prevention initiatives, would track, monitor, and log individuals aged 14 to 22 who were demonstrating elevated influence among peer groups, using digital platforms for local civic discourse, publicly associated with city flag narratives, i.e., systemic bias, civic distrust, mentored by known community influencers deemed ideologically motivating. At the bottom of page 6, the ward initiative is hereby assigned a Tier 1 monitoring classification, effective immediately. All youth affiliated with said program shall be logged as civic influence potentials under indirect observation. Report to Office of Deputy Public Affairs Director, Authorization Code, #DPA03, Rivera. Kent sat in silence. He reread that line 3 times. Rivera. Deputy Director Elena Rivera. The same official who denied any knowledge of Zion Stop. The same woman who had gone on local news and said, "This administration supports all peaceful youth programming." And now she was at the center of the entire web. He printed one copy, encrypted another, then drove straight to Esther's. This time, he didn't knock. He just stepped onto the porch and handed her the folder. She opened it slowly. Her eyes moved line by line. When she reached page 6, her breath caught. "They didn't just watch us," she said. "They invested in watching us." Kent nodded. "They turned our kids into metrics." That night, Zion, Yolanda, and Layla gathered around the kitchen table as Esther read the document aloud. No one spoke until the final page. Then Layla said, "If this had leaked a year ago, no one would have believed it." Zion looked at her. "They believe now." They devised a plan. Not a protest. Not a press release. A hearing. Not in City Hall, but in the community. A live-streamed public forum hosted by the Ward Initiative, inviting elected officials to answer for the folder. On camera. They called it "Unflag Us, a Reckoning in Real Time." The invitations were issued with 5 simple words. "You are being called forward." One by one, officials confirmed. Most declined. One accepted. Elena Rivera. The hearing was set in the South Shore Cultural Center, a building filled with stained glass, quiet echoes, and community memory. It was packed. Layla stood at the mic first. No script, just the folder in her hand. "My name is Layla Ward. I'm 17. I go to class. I volunteer. I've never been arrested. But I was flagged." She held up the document. "Not because of anything I did, but because of who raised me. Because I was in a room like this. Because I dared to care." Then she turned to Rivera, who sat alone at the end of the panel. "Tell me, Ms. Rivera, when did protecting the city mean spying on its children?" Rivera shifted in her seat. She began with, "We were acting out of an abundance of caution." And the room exhaled. Not in relief. In disappointment. Layla pressed again. "How many names are on the list? Who authorized the surveillance? Where's the oversight?" Rivera fumbled. Her answers were slippery, loaded with phrases like data streams, automated indexing, and digital footprint assessments. Zion leaned in. "You mean you tracked us because we posted about justice?" Rivera paused. "We flagged trends that could be disruptive." Layla cut in. "No, you flagged hope, and called it a threat." The moment went viral in minutes. The full hearing stream hit 5 million views by morning. By day 3, a civil rights coalition filed a federal injunction against the city of Chicago and Rivera's office. By day 5, the mayor placed Rivera on administrative leave. And the youth of the Ward Initiative? They weren't scared. They were ready. At home that night, Esther sat at her table, folder in hand. She looked at Marcus's photo. "They tried to erase you, too," she whispered. Then she looked out the window at the night sky. Dozens of porch lights dotted the block. Windows glowed with laptops streaming the hearing replay. And in the distance, she heard someone shouting, joyful, defiant. "We are not a file number." Esther smiled, because they finally understood what Marcus meant when he wrote, "Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what speaks for you when they try to forget you were ever here." It had been 4 years since Esther Ward last boarded a plane. The last time was to bury her son with military honors in Arlington. Now, she was flying to Washington, D.C., not to mourn, but to testify. A congressional subcommittee had summoned her as a community representative in an emergency hearing titled Youth Surveillance and Civil Liberties, Oversight in the Age of Algorithmic Policing. She didn't need to bring documents. The nation had already seen the folder. She didn't need to rehearse her words. The truth had already burned through her like gospel. All she had to do now was speak. The capital was colder than she remembered. Everything gleamed, but nothing felt warm. Security guards nodded respectfully as she passed. Staffers whispered behind closed doors. Esther Ward had become a name that traveled further than any badge or gun ever could. When she stepped into the chamber, the room fell into an unspoken hush. On one side, elected officials, advisors, federal representatives. On the other, a row of civic leaders and legal advocates. And at the far end of the panel, Esther. She sat, adjusted the microphone, took a breath, then began. My name is Esther Ward. I am not a lawyer. I am not a professor. I am a mother. Her voice was calm, firm. She did not rush. I was called here to speak about what happens when governments decide that children, especially black and brown children, are threats before they are even fully people. She raised a copy of the confidential folder. This document didn't catch criminals. It didn't prevent violence. It watched. It labeled. It sorted kids based on how loud their dreams were. It called passion a red flag. It called ambition a risk factor. And it called me, a woman who buried her son in uniform, a national liability. The room was silent. She continued. My niece Layla, age 17, was put on this list. Because she wrote an op-ed. Because she sat in the same room I did. Because she hoped out loud. What kind of nation criminalizes hope? What kind of city funds surveillance on those too young to vote, but old enough to question injustice? A senator leaned into the mic. Mrs. Ward, are you suggesting that law enforcement has no role in youth monitoring? Esther turned to him, eyes sharp. I'm saying if your system needs to monitor children instead of mentor them, then your system isn't broken. It was built wrong. The gallery behind her erupted in quiet applause. Clerks shushed them. But the truth had already filled the room like thunder in waiting. Esther went on. You flagged Zion Matthews because he led. You flagged Layla Ward because she spoke. And you erased the footage when your own conscience couldn't bear the mirror. She held up a folded paper, Marcus's last letter. This was written by my son before he died in Afghanistan. He said, don't let them use my name for decoration. Use it like a hammer, a light, a mirror. She looked directly into the cameras. So here I am. Holding the mirror. I hope you like what you see. For once, no one interrupted. Not even the politicians who disagreed. Because power doesn't know what to do with truth when it's wrapped in dignity. That night, her testimony aired in full. Unedited. Uninterrupted. Unfiltered. It trended under. Hashtag Esther Speaks. Hashtag Unflag Our Future. Hashtag Not a Suspect. News anchors called it one of the most important congressional testimonies since Anita Hill. Activists called it a moment of national reckoning. And young people? They called it permission. Permission to question, to rise, to speak. Zion watched from his apartment, surrounded by youth leaders from Oakland, Atlanta, Baltimore. All of them silent as Esther's words filled the screen. When it ended, one of them whispered, She gave us language. Zion nodded. She gave us instruction. The next morning, 3 more cities announced formal audits into youth watch lists. The Department of Justice requested access to CPD's internal programs. And Elena Rivera? She resigned, citing health reasons. But everyone knew what made her sick. The truth catching up. Esther returned to Chicago that afternoon. At O'Hare, a baggage handler recognized her. Ran over. Didn't ask for a photo. He just said, Ma'am, my niece is in the Ward Initiative. She found herself there. And now, because of you, she knows the world can't unsee her. Esther smiled, touched his hand gently. Tell her to keep being loud, baby. They'll run out of flags before we run out of truth. That evening, she lit her candle, folded Marcus's letter, set it beside her tea, and looked at the glowing inbox on her laptop. Over 1,200 emails. From parents. From veterans. From kids with poems. From teachers with classroom murals. All of them saying the same thing. You didn't just speak. You woke us up. It began with a ping. An anonymous tip sent to the Ward Initiative's encrypted inbox. Subject line. They kept the tapes. Attached was a single video file. Low resolution. No timestamp. But unmistakable. It showed Zion. Hands up. Backpack on the ground. 2 officers circling him. And then, something the official story swore never happened. A shove. Zion hits the sidewalk. 1 officer laughs. The other glances at the dash cam and switches it off. The clip ends with the engine starting. Gone. Zion watched the clip in silence, then turned to Kent. They said there were no recordings. Kent nodded grimly. Because they didn't want us to see the unofficial ones. The source, whoever they were, had sent more. 12 video files. All from internal CPD, off-books storage. Footage never logged. Never archived. These weren't from body cams. They were from building cameras, police garages, private parking lot systems used by off-duty officers. Backdoor surveillance. Quiet. Hidden. Intended for blackmail, not justice. What the tapes revealed was patterned abuse. A 16-year-old girl handcuffed after asking to record her own stop. A student beaten behind a precinct garage. A youth organizer followed for 3 nights by the same unmarked cruiser. None of it made it into official records. But now it was all on file. Yolanda sat at the conference table with Zion and Kent, the videos looping silently behind them. We always thought surveillance was about tracking us, she whispered. We didn't know they were using it to erase themselves. They called an emergency meeting of the Ward Initiative Council. Esther joined late. She didn't sit. She stood by the screen and watched the worst clip twice. Then she spoke. We don't leak this. Zion looked up, confused. Why? Because outrage isn't a strategy, she said. It's a matchstick. It burns fast. She turned to the team. We make it undeniable. We organize these. We timestamp them. We line them up with falsified reports. And then, we hold a screening. One the city can't ignore. And so they did. They called it. The tapes they forgot to burn. A public exhibition. One night only. Held not in a theater, but in an abandoned rail depot converted into a youth center. They lined the walls with projectors. Each screen playing a different video. On loop. Attendees walked through in silence. Some cried. Some stared. Stone-faced. On the far wall, a giant timeline stretched across the concrete, linking every moment of footage to redacted reports, city statements, and budget records for the CPD's Community Engagement Initiative. It wasn't just visual. It was a case file. Laid bare. Undeniable. Cold. And in the center of it all, a single chair. Empty. Lit by a single spotlight. Above it, a sign. For the officers who said they forgot. We saved you a seat. Now remember. Media outlets picked it up immediately. Not as a gallery, but as a tribunal. Chicago youth stage visual indictment, The Atlantic. This is what accountability looks like, NPR. The tapes that broke the narrative, The New Yorker. But the biggest ripple came from within. A group of 8 CPD officers, young, mostly Black and Latino, submitted formal requests for reassignment and public statements of dissent. They called themselves the Eightfold Batch. In their joint letter, they wrote, "We did not sign up to protect a system that watches children and hides what it doesn't want to explain. We stand with the Ward Initiative." The next day, the mayor announced an independent truth commission on youth surveillance. It would be co-chaired by a federal civil rights attorney, a youth representative from the Ward Initiative, and by public demand, Esther Ward. She didn't say yes immediately. When Zion asked her why, she said, "Because truth commissions don't just expose things. They bury people. And I've done enough burying." He looked at her for a long time, then simply said, "We need you, but we won't break if you say no." She smiled softly. "Then maybe it's time to say yes." At the final hour of the exhibition, a small girl walked up to Zion. She couldn't have been older than 10. She pointed to the screen where Layla was shown being watched at school. "That happened to me," she said. "The security guard made me empty my bag because I had stickers." Zion knelt beside her. "Did anyone listen when you told them?" She shook her head. "They said it wasn't serious." Zion handed her a marker. "Write it down. Every story here matters. Especially yours." She smiled, then scrawled on the wall. "They didn't see me, but now I see them." Esther watched from the corner, and for the first time since the original stop, she felt something new. Not justice, not closure, but relief. Because the city wasn't whispering anymore. It was watching back. It started with a locker. Scratched. Dented. Painted over a dozen times. This time, someone had written 3 words in permanent black marker. "Traitors wear Ward." Underneath it, someone else had crossed it out and scribbled, "Traitors erase tapes." It was the 13th precinct. The same station where Zion's non-existent stop had originated. The same place where body cams went mysteriously dark. And now? The building was boiling. The CPD wasn't just divided. It was splintering. There were the ones who stood by the old way. Unspoken codes. Closed ranks. Look away. Write nothing. They called the recent changes softness. They said the ward initiative was turning officers into targets. And then there were the eightfold badge, the young ones who'd spoken out after the surveillance tapes dropped. They were still on payroll, still on patrol, but now they walked halls full of narrowed eyes and whispered slurs. Officer Alondra Cruz, one of the 8, found her locker jammed shut with glue. Inside, a note. "You don't belong here." She photographed it. Didn't cry. She posted it with the caption, "Correction. I don't belong where justice isn't welcome." It went viral. In Esther's kitchen, Cruz sat across from Zion, Yolanda, and Kent. She didn't wear her uniform. Only a worn hoodie with the words, "Protect, Serve, Speak." Kent poured her tea. He didn't ask what she'd lost. He knew. She leaned forward. "I'm not just here because they're threatening me. I'm here because I found something. And it's worse than I thought." She pulled a flash drive from her coat pocket. This is the internal review memo from 2022. The one Rivera signed. The one that expanded the youth watch list to include secondary influence networks. Yolanda blinked. Secondary. Cruz nodded. Friends. Followers. People who retweeted. Kids who sat next to kids who spoke. Zion's voice dropped. They turned social media into a dragnet. Cruz hesitated. Then she added. "And they pulled your name off the list once the media exploded. But they left Layla's on." Esther didn't speak. She stared out the window. Then whispered. "They're hoping she rises just enough to make her a target, but not enough to make her visible." The room was silent. Until Kent stood. "We bring it forward." Cruz nodded. "We go internal first. File it through the Oversight Commission. Let them bury themselves if they try to suppress it." Yolanda added. "And we let the people know. This isn't just surveillance. This is engineering." That night, the flash drive was submitted to the Civilian Review Board. Anonymous, but timestamped. Protected by the whistleblower statute. Flagged as evidence of systemic profiling. Inside it, emails showing the watch list grew from 72 names to 443 within 18 months. Internal training slides titled Digital Dissent Patterns Among Urban Youth. A presentation proposing influence disruption tactics like surprise visits, indirect detentions, and visible presence patrols in proximity to flagged youth. And the final slide? Suggested language for press inquiries. These programs are designed with community protection in mind. We do not track individuals, we support environments. 2 days later, the Oversight Commission confirmed receipt of the files. They called for a closed-door inquiry. But it was already too late. The contents had leaked. Again. This time to the Chicago Free Press, a fiercely independent outlet with nothing to lose and a history of breaking hard truths. Their headline? CPD engineered a net around black youth. The code just broke. The story rocked the city. The mayor released a statement, measured, safe, too late. The police chief resigned for personal reasons. Protests bloomed again. Not chaotic. Not burning. But marching. Focused. Multi-generational. From the Loop to Lawndale, people walked silently carrying signs that said, "Not just watched, we were targeted. My timeline was their case file. You followed us. Now we lead." Esther, again, said nothing. She sat in the back of the march. Layla walked up front, by choice. She held a sign that read, "Your file on me was incomplete." That night, Officer Cruz posted a photo of the crowd. And this caption. They called it betrayal. But what's more loyal than refusing to be part of the lie? And in a precinct locker 2 blocks away, someone left a new message. Some of us remember who we were supposed to be. No one crossed it out. No one painted over it. Not this time. The lawsuit wasn't a surprise. The city had been bracing for it. Whispers of class action, civil suit, and constitutional breach had been swirling since the leaked surveillance files hit the national news cycle. But what they didn't expect, what no one expected, was who would file it. Not a firm, not a parent, not a nonprofit. It was Zion Matthews himself. 19, college sophomore, public figure, and now plaintiff. Filed in federal court. Matthews versus City of Chicago. Cause, violation of First and Fourth Amendment rights. Scope, unlawful surveillance, emotional distress, intentional deception of public records. Requested relief, damages, policy reform, and court-mandated youth protections. But Zion wasn't alone. Co-plaintiffs soon joined. A Muslim teen profiled after a poetry reading. A Latina organizer flagged for handing out voter registration forms. A 17-year-old who was marked risky for sharing ward initiative content online. And the suit now had legal teeth. Derek Kent served as key witness. So did Officer Cruz. So did the anonymous whistleblower, now identified as Lena Calder, a systems analyst who had once helped build the list she later leaked. The trial was granted an accelerated timeline, because even the courts realized, if a government watches its children without cause, then those children have the right to stand and watch it back through a courtroom lens. Day one of the trial drew national coverage. Outside the courthouse, protesters lined the streets. Some held up copies of the folder. Others carried signs that said, "Their silence is not our consent. If you flag us, face us." Inside, Zion sat in a charcoal gray suit. No tie. Layla at his left. Yolanda behind him. Esther in the second row, silent, watchful, present. The city's opening statement was flat. While regrettable lapses may have occurred, the city denies malicious intent or targeted suppression. They leaned on bureaucracy. They leaned on complexity. They leaned on fog. But Zion's legal team had something stronger. Clarity. Day 2, Kent took the stand. He recounted the Zion stop, the missing footage, the erased bodycam logs, the fake timestamps, and the coded emails he'd uncovered years later. The courtroom held its breath as he read one line aloud from an internal memo. Surveillance is most effective when the target doesn't know it's happening. Day 3, Lena testified. Nervous, but resolved. She explained how the list had started small, an internal tool for community mapping. Then how it ballooned, driven by politics, funding, fear. At some point, it stopped being about risk. It became about containment. And kids like Zion? They weren't risks. They were reminders of everything the city hadn't fixed. Day 4, Zion spoke. The room fell into a hush as he walked to the stand. He looked directly at the jury. No notes, just a deep breath. They stopped me. They shoved me. They laughed at my name. Then they said it never happened. Then they said I was too loud. Then they said I was dangerous. Now they're saying it was just policy. But what they'll never say, what they can't say, is that I belonged on that sidewalk. I belonged in that program. I belong here. Esther closed her eyes. She saw Marcus's face. Smiling. Proud. Somewhere in that room, he was there. The defense sputtered on cross. They tried to question Zion's social media, his influence, his intent. But every time they reached for scandal, he gave them something stronger. Poise. Not perfection. Not spin. Just the undeniable presence of someone who refused to be made invisible again. Outside, reporters swarmed. But Zion said nothing on the courthouse steps. He simply raised a hand, palm open, facing forward. And the crowd raised theirs back. 2 weeks later, the ruling came. The city of Chicago was found liable for unlawful surveillance, failure to preserve public records, and the willful emotional and reputational harm inflicted on Zion and others. The city was ordered to pay damages, issue a public apology, dismantle the youth flagging database, implement third-party oversight on all civic surveillance programs, and most importantly, create a new bill of digital rights for youth activists across the city. The mayor gave a statement. Scripted, safe, but he ended with one sentence not in his notes. We didn't just watch the wrong people. We ignored the right ones. The Ward Initiative threw no party, no press event. Instead, they released a statement. We didn't go to court to win. We went to court to finish the sentence the city tried to erase. At home, Esther lit a candle. The folded flag sat nearby. Marcus's letter beside it. Layla curled up on the couch, exhausted. Zion sat on the porch in silence. When Esther brought him tea, she simply said, "The trial they never wanted was the truth they could never hide." He nodded. "Now what?" She smiled. "Now we build something that doesn't need a courtroom to be believed." It happened on a Thursday. A quiet day. No cameras. No courtrooms. Just a roundtable gathering at the Ward Initiative building. Esther was mid-sentence, talking about grant proposals and mentorship rotations, when her hand trembled slightly over her teacup. No one noticed. Not at first. Then her voice slowed. Her breath shortened. And her sentence stopped. She gripped the edge of the table. But her knees gave out before her pride did. Esther Ward collapsed. Yolanda was the first to reach her. Zion called 911 with a voice sharper than he'd ever used on a mic. Layla held Esther's hand the entire time, whispering, "You're okay. You're here. You're okay." But no one in that room felt okay. At the hospital, the diagnosis came quickly. Exhaustion, heart strain, silent stress, a mild cardiac event, but serious. The doctor, a gentle woman in her 50s, spoke softly as she looked over Esther's chart. Has she been under prolonged pressure? Zion let out a quiet, bitter laugh. She's been holding a city on her shoulders. Word of Esther's collapse spread faster than they wanted. News anchors led with civil rights icon hospitalized following courtroom victory. Social media trended. Hashtag stand for Esther. Hashtag our backbone is tired. Thousands of messages poured in. Rest, Queen. You gave us breath. Now breathe. Take the time you wouldn't give yourself. But inside the Ward Initiative's office, the tone was different. Quieter. Sharper. More urgent. Because for the first time, she wasn't there. And they didn't know how long she would be. Kent took temporary leadership. He moved slower these days, but carried a steadiness the team leaned on. Yolanda managed logistics. Layla, surprisingly, handled community outreach. Zion. He didn't speak much at first. He just worked. Late nights. Long days. Until finally, he stood up at a team meeting and said, "We've been quoting her for 2 years. Now let's become something she can quote back." They launched the Ward Resilience Fund, dedicated to protecting youth-led justice movements from burnout, surveillance, and institutional pushback. They published an open-access toolkit, How to Build Without Burning Out. They sent care packages to partner organizers in 5 cities. They even hosted Chicago's first intergenerational leadership circle, bringing together veteran activists and young advocates to talk across time. But every day, Zion visited the hospital. He never stayed long, just long enough to say, "Still here. Still building. We're not done." Sometimes Esther was awake, sometimes not. But the nurses said her heart rate steadied when he spoke. One afternoon, Kent visited her too. He sat beside her and whispered, "I used to think justice came in the form of a badge. Then I thought it came from giving it up. But you made me realize." He stopped, shook his head. "You are justice. The kind they don't train for." He took her hand. "You rest now. We're trained." When Esther finally woke, fully 5 days had passed. Layla was at her side. She opened her eyes slowly, then spoke hoarsely. Still standing. Layla smiled through tears. "You taught us how." That evening, Esther watched the news from her hospital bed. No war stories. No political theater. Just a live feed of Ward Initiative students hosting a neighborhood forum. They were answering questions, explaining youth civic rights, helping elders register for city council sessions, talking about mental health. All without her. All because of her. Zion sent a photo to her phone. A group of 14-year-olds in hoodies, sitting on the steps of the Initiative building, holding a cardboard sign that read, "We are what she carried." Esther stared at it for a long time, then typed just one line back. "Now you carry each other." Later that night, alone with her tea and the gentle hum of hospital monitors, Esther whispered to the ceiling, "Marcus, they didn't break." She smiled softly. "You can rest now, baby. So can I." But outside those walls, the world was still spinning, and her name was still echoing, not through headlines, but through actions, through sidewalks being repaved where youth were once profiled, through bills written in her name, through murals retouched with new colors by kids who hadn't even been born the day Marcus died. Because movements don't die when their leaders rest. They live on. When the people remember the blueprint. Released her on a cloudy Monday. No press. No podium. Just Esther in a gray shawl, a walking cane, and quiet resolve. As she stepped outside, the wind brushed her cheeks like a child's hand. Not pushing, not rushing, just reminding her, "You're still here." Zion was waiting in the car. He said nothing, just opened the door, helped her in, and whispered, "Not your funeral." She smiled gently. No, but it was a rehearsal. At home, the porch looked the same, but the city had changed, and she could feel it. In the stillness, in the absence of urgency. She sat, took a breath, and for once, it was just a breath, not a countdown. Inside, the kettle whistled. Layla had brewed her favorite tea. No fanfare, just ritual. A soft return to a world that no longer demanded she be its pillar. Not because it stopped needing her, but because it had learned to stand. The next week, She declined every interview, every request for a comeback statement, every podcast invitation, every speaking tour offer. Instead, she recorded a voice message on an old tape recorder Marcus had given her once. She sent it privately to the Ward Initiative team. In it, her voice was low, even, purposeful. You thought I led you. But truth is, you were always leading yourselves. I just cleared the fog so you could see the road. This isn't a movement built on grief anymore. It's built on grit. You've made that clear. So don't wait for my voice. Find your own. And when it shakes, let it shake the room. The team played it at their weekly meeting. No one spoke afterward. Zion turned off the speaker, stared out the window, then said, "This isn't about finishing what she started anymore. It's about building what she never had time to dream." And so they did. The Ward Legacy Fellowship was announced the following month. A national mentorship and leadership incubator designed by youth for youth, with chapters launching in Oakland, Baltimore, Memphis, Detroit, New Orleans, and a 6-city mural tour under the title, Not Her Funeral. Each mural would show Esther, not as an icon, but as a mirror, surrounded by younger faces, holding no torch, just sitting, watching, trusting. Meanwhile, the Ward Initiative's headquarters changed too. One wall, once covered in planning sheets, was turned into a living archive. Youth could write notes, tape photos, leave stories. A growing collage of what they were building. Above it, a sign read, "You don't need to be loud to last. You just need to be rooted." At home, Esther began gardening again. She dug up old soil, planted sunflowers. Let the silence be enough. One morning, Layla found her kneeling beside the porch. She was planting something new. Layla asked, "What are you growing?" Esther looked up. Shade. The kind other people can sit under. A month later, she agreed to speak at only one event. A community graduation for Ward Initiative's youngest class ever, ages 13 to 16. They didn't know her like the others did. To them, she was legend. But when she stepped up to the podium, cane in hand, they saw something else. A woman who had walked through fire and still smelled like sunflowers. She spoke softly. No microphone needed. People ask how I survived. I tell them, I stopped needing to be the loudest person in the room. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is walk away before they burn you out. She looked at each of them. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is let someone else carry the torch, even when your hands still work just fine. She smiled. This isn't my funeral. This is your garden. And I'm just a woman making sure the soil's rich enough. When she sat down, the students didn't clap. They stood, one by one, quiet, still, the way she taught them. Not because it was expected, but because they had learned. You rise. For the people who taught you to kneel for no one. That night, Zion posted a photo of the moment. He captioned it. She didn't come back. She never left. We just learned how to walk beside her. And across the city, a child pinned a photo of Esther to her backpack. When asked why, she said, "So when I'm scared, I can remember what being unshakable looks like." They unveiled the monument at sunrise. No cameras, no speeches, just a quiet gathering under a soft orange sky. The final mural in the 6-city tour. The one painted not in the heart of downtown, but on the side of an old elementary school in South Shore. 2 blocks from where Marcus Ward grew up. 3 from where Esther was stopped. The wall stretched 40 feet wide. And there, centered in a bloom of blues, golds, and smoky grays, was Esther. Not young, not made up to look iconic. Just Esther. Sitting on her porch, candle in one hand, folder in her lap, and a small group of children gathered at her feet. Some writing, some holding protest signs, some simply listening. Above her head, scrawled in delicate white script. Her name wasn't just remembered. It was respected. It was a warning. That dignity stands taller than fear. The mural didn't just mark an ending. It marked a standard. That same week, the city of Chicago passed the Youth Protection and Digital Integrity Act, enshrining a complete ban on youth watch lists without direct probable cause, full transparency on surveillance tools used near schools and civic centers, creation of a publicly funded, youth-led oversight board, a national database tracking unjust stops and false citations involving minors, and buried deep in the resolution's closing clause, 2 words written in bold. Ward Standard. It would be adopted across 12 more cities within the year. They didn't call it a policy. They called it a promise. Zion sat on the stage the morning after the vote. Empty chairs around him. No crowd. Just the soft tap of rain and the echo of a generation catching its breath. He opened his notebook. Wrote 4 words. We named the storm. And beside it, 1 line more. And then we taught it to grow gardens. Later that evening, he stopped by Esther's house. He found her in the back garden, sleeves rolled, fingernails full of dirt. A small plaque had been planted beneath her tallest sunflower. It read, "This soil remembers. So we don't have to start from scratch." She saw him coming and stood slowly. "So?" she asked. "They pass it?" He nodded. "All of it. And they named the clause after you." She smirked. "They finally gave me a title I didn't ask for." He chuckled. "They didn't give it. We made it permanent." They sat in the garden. The breeze carried the scent of mint, lavender, and something stronger. Legacy. Esther looked at Zion and said, "They used to say my name like it was a question. Now they say it like a consequence." Zion smiled. "Your name is a warning, Ms. Ward." "No," she corrected gently. "It's a reminder of what happens when we're seen, when we stop shrinking, when we stop waiting for permission to belong." Across the city, schools had begun teaching the Ward case and civic curriculum. Art students painted their own murals. Debate teams studied Zion's trial. Young activists printed badges that read, "Unflagged, unbought, unbroken." And once a year, on July 12th, they gathered. Not for a march, not for a protest, but for a walk. No chants, no microphones. Just thousands of young people walking from 71st Street to Soldier Field, holding sunflowers. At the front of the procession, a small girl, age 9, Layla's niece. She held a sign. "Her name gave us ours." Esther didn't walk that year. She watched from her porch, rocking gently, sunlight on her lap, a folded flag beside her tea. A reporter once asked her, late in life, "How did you do it? How did you take one moment on a rainy sidewalk and turn it into national change?" She looked up, smiled, and said, "I didn't. They did. I just stood still long enough for them to realize they could move." That was the last interview she ever gave. She passed away quietly 2 years later, in her sleep. No memorial service. Per her wishes. Just a note left behind. "Don't mourn me. Mourn the world we had to rebuild from silence. Then go build it better. Use my name as a compass, not a cross." Her funeral wasn't a crowd. It was 1,000 small gatherings. Porches lit by candles. Classrooms reading Marcus's letter. Gardens named after her. And one mural in South Shore, where children still sit beneath her painted smile and ask, "What did she see in us?" And the older ones answer, "Everything."